Hi, everyone. Hi, Ksenia. Welcome,
Hello,
everybody,
everyone.
welcome everyone to a special live stream of Disasters Deconstructed podcast. We are here for another book group discussion. Yay! It's our second time doing this. It's been a long time coming. Probably mostly my fault due to
Absolutely your fault.
Slow pace of reading sometimes. I usually have like 10 or more books on the go, and yeah. Anyway, you know my issues with taking on too many books at one time.
And fiction. Everybody needs to know about your lack of reading fiction.
Aversion to fiction, yeah, is a problem for me.
Yeah, for all of you people listening out there, let's just all tweet at Jason and tell him to read fiction. Join my movement to make Jason read fiction. Yay!
Absolutely. But we're really glad to be here again. We're going to be here with you for the next hour, and some of our friends in the Disasters Deconstructed book group. So with us today, we have some of our comrades from the previous book group, Darian Alexander Williams from MIT, who also co-hosted season 5 with us. Welcome, Darian. Thanks for being with us again.
Thanks for having me back. I missed y'all.
Miss you too. And Claudia Santos from University of Lisbon, who also was with us previously and indeed chose the book for today.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Claudia. Welcome. And we also have with us Kene Onukwube, who is a program manager at Solidaridad West Africa, Nigeria. So welcome, Kene.
Nice to meet you, everyone. Hello.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So, book group, my favorite. This is our third one, I think, right? And second live stream. So this is really exciting. And today, of course, we're going to talk about Chinua Achebe's. So I've got Trilogy all in one book. I don't know what you people have.
I have this one.
Oh, so okay, different versions. Come on then, show us. Oh, classic, nice, Claudia.
I have it in PDF form, so I can't show off right now.
This is the problem, right, with ebooks. Anyway.
What Claudia has is what the original page had been, the back cover for years.
Yeah, that is the classic one. That's amazing. But yeah, there's been quite a few editions, I think, by different publishing houses. And we will talk more about the book. But anyway, so Claudia, thank you so much for joining all of our 3 book groups. You're our old book grouper. Can I call you that?
Yeah,
seasoned book grouper. So thank you so much for joining us again, and thanks for choosing the book. Why did you choose this book? Do you want to tell us?
Yeah. So as you said, Ksenia, we had three. This is our third book discussion we're gonna have, and the first one was a fiction. The second one was a nonfiction, and I thought it would be interesting to, this time around, have a book that lies in the intersection of these two. Although it is a novel, it depicts the reality of many indigenous communities around the world. But also my second reason for choosing has a lot to do with this need to start decolonizing knowledge. I think it is crucial that we rewrite histories and history by focusing on different rationales to move away from Western-centered forms of thinking. And I really think that this novel gives that possibility, that we begin looking at things very, very differently. And so, yeah, those are the main reasons why I chose it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for choosing this, because I think for many people that perhaps was the first introduction to Nigerian literature, or I guess in some cases even African literature, particularly for Western readers. And we will again come back to this. But so what did you think about the book, Claudia? What was your personal opinion about it?
Yeah, when I started reading, I thought, oh, this is not, is it just me? it's not that straightforward to read this book. There are a lot of characters. There is a lot going on, but I just read the book before going into Guinea-Bissau, and this is very much how I find African societies. There's a lot of people that you meet, a lot of things going on at the same time, and it's difficult to follow at times. And I wanted to come to this sentence that it was an interview that someone did to Chinua Achebe, and he said why he wrote these books was to help, he says, to help my society regain belief in itself and put away the complexes of denigration and self-abasement. And I think he really talks about what most people doesn't want to talk about, and what most people is afraid to talk about, to disrupt that status quo that you guys talk so much on your podcasts. And really, especially if we think that these books were even written, some of these books were even written before Nigeria gained independence. It must have been, I can only imagine that it must have been tough to put that out, but Ksenia can explain more about that. But I think that the messages that Chinua Achebe leaves on the book are very powerful. They tell us a lot about the struggle of a population and their encounters with the colonizer, and Christianism as well. I also think it's an invitation to think about the imposition of Western values upon traditional societies that continues to happen until today. But also, it always leads me to think about what would be of Africa and other indigenous communities if the colonizer never arrived. How would they be today? So I do think a lot about that.
Great. Thank you so much, Claudia. All right, let's do our traditional book group thing. I'm just going to ask all of you, Darren, Ksenia, and Jason, what you thought about the book. Darren, I'm going to start with you. So.
Yeah, well, first, Claudia, I really appreciate the reasons that you shared for bringing this text to us. I hadn't read Chinua Achebe's work in many years, since I don't know, since I was a teenager, and Things Fall Apart was part of our class reading. And I remember that being a really amazing experience. And honestly, maybe the first, in my high school education, maybe the first or second time I was ever assigned to read a text by any Black person ever. So it was powerful, and I was really excited to return. And I actually kind of struggled with getting through some of the story at first, before I had sort of a moment of sort of sitting back and thinking, kind of like what you alluded to earlier, Claudia, there's so many people and characters, and my brain immediately is just trying to follow one kind of character, or one sort of rationale as it interacts with another rationale in the story, before sitting back and thinking maybe this is incredibly purposeful, and maybe the relationships are maybe I should think about the drivers of the story being sort of this in this relational way, rather than thinking about characters as these atomized kinds of people. I think the book, perhaps it's very obvious to anyone who's read it, but it really, for me, sort of revealed some of the finer ways that, or smaller grain ways that colonial systems and impositions sort of erode these relationships as well, and the way there's a lot of sort of hijacking of power, not just the sort of big, grand kind of moments of incredible imperial violence, but also, having intermediaries sort of sabotaging things like communication, sabotaging things like tradition and lineage and expectation, keeping people waiting, and all of the ways that sort of disrupts everything and sort of imposes new forms of power that, arguably are still existing and still sort of organizing parts of our world. So I really like the book, but I definitely, at first I was like, oh, this is like, I also don't read a lot of fiction these days anymore, and I used to. I thought like maybe my fiction brain just isn't turned on right now. And then when I sort of thought about the relationality of everything, then it became a very smooth ride and very beautiful read all the way to the end. So.
Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing this, Darren. I'm going to make you read fiction as well. Okay, now I'm on a mission. There are two of my co-hosts are not reading fiction. This is it. I'm going to do something about you. You both. Kenny, over to you. What did you think about the book?
Well, thanks very much. Interestingly, my first read of this book was almost about 30 years ago. It was one of the books that formed the literature in school, in my elementary school or so. Well, in summary, my perception of it is that it's what I can refer to as a form of creative or destructive self-colonization swap. Don't mind the jargon there, but it is a look at a society that appreciates colonization as that which is foreign or alien to it, and that is there to remove their form and understanding of civilization. Now, amidst that construct, those who were trying to learn the white man's or the colonial master's ways and approaches found themselves in between about how to keep memories and practices of their civilization versus unlearning it at the same time, in order to find space for the new colonial, the new colonial master's ideology. And so there is a challenge about a swap in ideology, understanding, perceptions to life, and approaches to life. Now, amidst this entanglement came this natural disaster, which you may have seen a replica of that in Things Fall Apart, where the African society has its own definition and understanding of what drought is. And they see drought as the handiwork of a deity that is revered. And so could the drought that had happened be as a result of the challenge they had about either accepting or not accepting the colonial ideologies that has visited them? Or is this as a result of the perceived chief priests of their deity who did not tend to want to follow the colonial masters offer? So which is actually responsible for this? So that entanglement, and then from there you can read off a lot of, you can take off a lot of meaning or understanding following the perceptions of whichever, whether it is because of the colonial masters or it is because of the chief priests, or what has happened, and here they were. It does appear that the swap in colonization is also a swap of civilization, which made them to begin to learn or unlearn their own pasts or their civilization in order to be able to adapt to the new processes. So it's full of a lot of intrigues for one to learn from. But for me, I've never taken a position. It's all open learning for me, whichever is the trajectory of the ideology. Yeah.
Thanks, Kenny. Thank you so much. And we will come back to to ideology a little bit later on. But Jason, what did you think about the book?
Thank you for all these thoughts so far. Really insightful. And I learned so much in this book about the beliefs and traditions, the village life, which I had never encountered before. Wasn't this for me growing up. And so I started off with Things Fall Apart. When I wanted to, I knew we were going to read Arrow of God, so I started with Things Fall Apart and really loved it. And I find Arrow of God a bit harder actually to read for me, maybe because I already identified with the characters from the first book. But for me, it was like this undermining of tradition and belief by these outside forces, and like some of you have already picked up on, the use of intermediaries and the use of people's own people from some of the characters' own families that were starting to bring up these conflicts in belief, in tradition, in values, and it would come to the surface. And something that really stood out to me was just the incredible wisdom and use of story and expression, which really struck me in contrast with the perspectives of the colonizers in this story, which were, I find it really interesting the way that that you kind of heard from these kind of first person accounts from the British as well. And so just setting those in contrast for me was interesting, because it's all very bureaucratic. It was kind of like a fun sort of expedition for some of them. It was, they were making decisions in a very pragmatic way. It was kind of missional, like they were kind of above the local people by right, but then when you actually saw the relationships, it was like, wow, the wisdom is really coming from the villages. The stories they were telling, I just learned so much just by listening to those stories. There's some stuff in there that makes me very uncomfortable. The treatment of women, for instance, in a lot of cases. But there's so much wisdom in there, and the way that it was written was just incredible. And yeah, I've been looking at like some of the sayings, some of the sayings, and like the equivalents in English are just not up to scratch. The sayings here are richer and more descriptive and visual, and I loved it. So I'm going to revisit and keep learning, because it was a great exploration of language and expression and wisdom for me.
Super. Thanks, Jason. For me, like Darren, actually, I came across Chinua Achebe when I was a teenager, but unlike Darren, I didn't read the book. I just looked at it. Mom had this Masters of Contemporary Prose collection. So it was, Soviet really published a lot of non-Russian literature, translated literature, non-Western literature as well. And so we had this whole shelf of this Masters of Contemporary Prose. and Chinua Achebe, actually, it was this book, Arrows of God, which was translated in Russian. I remember it, but I wasn't interested really at that time. I was interested in Russian classics, so I've never read it in Russian. And then I was reintroduced to Chinua Achebe by my really good friend, Dr. Ksenia, who is Nigerian. So we did PhD together, and she brought me a copy of A Man of the People. And I kind of realized that actually until then, I've never, apart from, looking at that volume that mom had, I've never read Nigerian authors before. And that must have been about 10 years ago. And so I read A Man of the People then, and I also read Things Fall Apart then. And I absolutely loved it because, again, like, you've all reflected, I didn't know much about Nigeria, and particularly, having then a friend, and having now a friend from Nigeria, I wanted to learn more. I was really, really curious, and I felt that Chinua Achebe gave voices to people and to characters that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. And what also fascinated me is that usually when I read books about African subcontinent, is that they were very much written from colonial perspective, right? Even when they retell the stories of, say, tribes, that's still that kind of Western perspective of how Westerners perceive Africa is very much of the forefront, and which didn't happen here for me. So I started investigating when Claudia chose this book. So I reread Things Fall Apart, and I read the whole trilogy again just to kind of get my thoughts together on it. And then I started digging deeper, as I always do. And what I found particularly interesting is Achebe's critique, which he wrote in the 70s, of the Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which again, it's kind of perceived as a masterpiece, right, of literature, and every school curricula kind of has it. But Achebe's critique is fantastic. If you haven't read it, I would really recommend it. And it's very interesting how he shows that Conrad denies people language, and whereas Achebe in his books, he treats the word and the language and the narrative, as Jason said, so carefully, right? Everybody has an opportunity to speak. Everybody is given the voice. And I really like how Achebe, in Things Fall Apart, he writes that only fool would kill a man that says nothing. And then there is nothing to fear from someone who shouts. And of course, kind of Achebe's critique was treated very much as controversial because it was based on colonial approach and colonial views that Conrad took. And it was treated as political statement instead of literary criticism. But what isn't really a political statement, and shouldn't this be a political statement? And so, I love the storytelling that the Arrow of God gave us. I love the wealth of minor characters, and the wives and the sons and the daughters of kind of the rivals and friends, but also the ethnographic richness that the narrative has brought and every character has brought, describing not just the story but the ordinary life and kind of the rituals and social interactions, but also social kind of I guess miscommunications and stresses. So you could see a person and as an individual, but also community kind of as a whole, and how life isn't always good, right? Or isn't always bad. And in particular, I love that Achebe somehow didn't explain directly the traditions, for example, right? Didn't directly explain community, and didn't romanticize or idealize the kind of the tradition, right? The traditional life. And that at the same time offering this navigation between traditional life and kind of, modern life, if you wish, and sort of in the government and bureaucracy. And everything was so intertwined without that feeling like he's telling us how we need to understand that. It was, I guess, I felt that everybody would somehow learn implicitly and perhaps take different things from the book, as it seems to appear from the discussion already. All right, speech over.
I think it's on to me, isn't it? Sorry,
you're daydreaming.
I was daydreaming, but I was just thinking from what you were saying, like about like the another thing was like how the local characters showed so much like respect and patience and tolerance, and the way that kind of opened them to violence and exploitation at times. And there's some points in the book where they were like discussing what to do, how to respond to violence, right? And the traditions were kind of, I just found it really interesting the way that traditions of respect and patience and tolerance actually opened them up to this oppression that didn't care about any of that, you know? So yeah, I'm really interested to hear from you, Ksenia, about how this work is received and discussed in Nigeria, and kind of the importance and impact of this work there.
Well, to be honest, I am not within any literary group, but the author's book, author's thing, actually gives value to all his work. And see any write-up and it's Chinua Achebe, people go for it, you know. On a ranking of 10, Things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease, and Arrow of God. The other one, The Man of the People. These four. There are others. There is also There Was a Country. These are books that are hot when it comes to talking about Chinua Achebe's books in the country. But specifically about how people look at this write-up on Arrow of God, I'm not able to assess that. Listen, but I can talk about really the fact that its X-rays actually what the society is like in the southeastern part of Nigeria, which is the Igbo culture. The Igbo, interestingly, I'm one of them. I'm an Igbo by by birth. So it does expose to the world what you find in the traditional and original, the Igbo man, his resilience, his culture, and how he values life and civilization, and then how he is able to transit from one form of, I still use the word ideology, you know, his perceptions to life, to the other. And this is one of the bases upon which you would see a lot of discourse, even in the politics of Nigeria, that involves the Igbo man. The same spirit and understanding and perceptions actually is what acculturates his approach to things and the way, you know, he participates. So within the Igbo culture, this book helps us to see the politics of a civilization, the way the Igbo are able to understand how they can, by a republican approach, lead themselves, organize themselves, and have an approach to life in general. And I may not be able to single out the book in terms of what is, how people value the book. because I'm not a literary person, so to say. I'm not in literature, but I'm sure that quite a number of persons who may be in that discipline might be able to say more than I can. Yeah.
But Chinua Achebe's work is it kind of a touchstone for like the generation now to understand the context in which they live and their history?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it is. And actually that also is part and parcel of what can, you can use that to understand the perceptions of the self-determination and the self-determining interests of the Igbo culture. It's always been that no, that kind of this thing that no, I have a roots. This is how I am born. This is how we behave. Yes, we're open. We accept, I accept whatever you come with, and I also respect your opinions. But allow me also to self-express, self-express, and let what I am and what I am looking forward to be, let it not be emasculated by your opinions. So that's the kind of perceptions and the views you see. And then if you look at that book, you will see vestiges of this, showing from one page to the other about how people self-determinate and how people could either, while unlearning where they are coming from and trying to fix themselves into the mold of the colonial master, but with the struggles there, they find it an interesting thing to learn along. One of the things that, if you look carefully at the book, for instance, I wrote down some of the very interesting parts of the story. Some of the very interesting quotes or things, like somebody said. For example, when suffering or hunger comes knocking at your door, and you say, "Sorry, my house is full." He says, "No, you don't worry. I have my own seat. I will just sit by the corner." So, such things and other phrases or terms that passages that you see within the book that shows you what Chinua Achebe refers to as proverbs, that they are the palm oil with which one eats words. Because here but by the time someone speaks or says up to 10 sentences in the local language, he would have used one or two proverbs, which is pregnant with meaning, So that's about how it looks, actually. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Thank you so much, Kenny. Claudia, I've got a question for you. So your research, you're working in West Africa. You have been for quite a while. So how does books like these, for example, help you ground your work in the context of colonial exploitation?
Yeah. Just before going into the colonial exploitation, I just want to say that I really love to hear what Kenny said about how Achebe really managed to preserve culture and tradition for future generations, because that's really what it is. And we don't know when those practices, those proverbs, all of that is going to disappear. And, I read the book just before going into Guinea-Bissau for the third time, and the parallels are unbelievable. It's like if I was living the book, because a lot of that traditional culture is still very much preserved in many of the different ethnicities in the country. So yeah, it was a very intense experience for me just going there after reading that book. But in terms of the colonial exploitation, I think books like this teach us how to look deeper at the root causes that have thrown many people into inequality and created injustice in the world. More importantly for me is it makes us move away from simplistic views and assumptions, and makes us want to dig deeper, makes us want to find out why are things the way they are today, whether we're looking at disasters or anything else. And so while undertaking my research on the motivations behind migration in Guinea-Bissau, it is very much perceptible to me that the factors influencing people's decisions to move or stay put are very much associated with vulnerabilities created a long time, a long history, and of course, the colonial presence plays a great role in it. And I was just writing about this week, and I just come to this realization that I cannot be talking about people's motivations if I don't talk about the colonial past. And there is no doubt in the case of Guinea-Bissau, and I'm sure the same for other countries, that colonialism was a prescription for everything that came after. And we had a colonial state, a Portuguese colonial state, and a local society that was very much intended for exploitation. And the whole purpose of having a colony is to make it profitable as possible for the metropole. And so at that time, Guinea-Bissau, when the Portuguese were there, Guinea-Bissau was considered one of the most economically underdeveloped colonies of Africa. And what we had is what Walter Rodney talks in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, a loss of development opportunity. This is a lot of what Guinea-Bissau got from the presence of Portugal there. It's that loss of development opportunity that did not allow the country to create strong foundations, political, social, and economic foundations, and to prepare a country for the post-colonial period. So what we see a lot today, and I don't want to put all the blame back there. What I'm saying, I mean, we have to make leaders of today accountable as well for what goes on. But these political, historical legacies have significantly influenced the evolution of the elite behavior that we have in the country today, particularly within the government and military structures. So there is this eager for power. The country never managed to leave that underdevelopment. And so, yeah, I think that this book, to me, was a great reflection into all these root causes that led Guinea-Bissau to be the country that is today, and for people to find themselves in the States, because, the country is, most people are living in poverty in Guinea-Bissau. This is the cruel reality of this country. And so it is important to go back and reflect on all of that, and that book just offers that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really wish we would treat fiction better as academics, because somehow very often we think, oh, but this is nothing, right? This is a fairy tale. But actually, I personally learn a lot from fiction in a different way, because it allows that story and narrative, and it shows history in a different way, completely, and perhaps allows for more perspective.
I love that you brought up how Europe underdeveloped Africa, Claudia, because I hadn't even really connected it like that, but it would be great to read this fiction with that nonfiction in tandem.
Alongside, yeah.
I really like that. I need to think more about this.
Yeah, I'm really grateful you brought up the work of Walter Rodney, Claudia, because I was like scribbling this in my notes and kind of connecting with what you said earlier, Ksenia, about this book feeling like it just provides so much kind of rich ethnographic detail and like the very intentional way that Rodney writes. I thought like felt like another side, I don't know if like the other side, but maybe another side of the coin to one, like detailing how different groups of people, different families, you know, like living their lives and going about a variety of kind of things that bookmark anyone's life, but also sort of this slow creeping colonial subversion of a lot of power relationships and a lot of systems, and maybe in different colonial contexts, like the way Frantz Fanon writes about kind of what you shared about sort of this swapping of even definitions of civilization, the swapping of knowledge, and this how the shift actually occurs to sort of go from having a traditional and indigenous set of knowledges and practices and standards, and how there's just like a slow kind of creep to sort of colonial modes of relating to yourself and each other, and sort of adopting a lot of adopting colonial systems. And sort of, you know, I think this book just sheds so much on how that process is very complicated, and even if resistance takes place in one sort of realm or in one set of decisions, it still kind of can creep back in from a different realm or a different set of institutions that's running parallel. So yeah, in my mind, like Fanon, Rodney, Achebe provided me a lot of clarity about how things have gotten to be where they are.
I want to follow up on that, Darren. I actually have a question for you based on that, because what, you know, we've all, I guess, alluded to the book being somewhat a political text, you know, rather than just a piece of literature, right? Literary fiction. And I wonder how do you feel that perhaps texts like this actually make us realize that what we often treat as apolitical is very much political, you know, and they allow us to kind of to push that message. Because, you know, in disasters, we talk very often about this, right? And in development, we talk a lot about this. You know, you're smiling at me now, but this is, of course, right? Because so often all of the above is treated as apolitical. So yeah, I'm just going to throw it at you. How, you know, how do we use this kind of narratives to help us explain that indeed all this process is apolitical?
I welcome other people's voices on this, but I guess I can take a first shot. Like, well, one, I think you already kind of touched on it, where I agree. I think fiction can illuminate so much in a very deep, political, scholarly, empirical way, and shouldn't sort of be treated as like either window dressing or like a very specific kind of culture that you can engage in leisurely, that's separate from the development of science, that's separate from the development of economies. And yeah, particular choices of fiction, like texts like this, that really reveal that the systemic nature of a variety of things that might be considered outside of the political realm, or considered, you know, to be personal, even though feminists have contributed the fact that the person was political. And I think that's what I think. I'll leave it there.
Thanks. Thanks, Darren. Kenny, do you have anything to add?
Not really at the moment. For me, actually, I think it's you see, I'm being careful about forming an opinion or a position, like I said at the beginning. Yeah, because the book is written in my own setting, and incidentally, Chinua Achebe and myself come from very close, communities, contiguous community area. So a lot of what he has written actually depicts what historically happened in my own setting. Excuse me, please. So I see a lot of issues around being able to, what projects the Igbo culture, not because it is the Igbo culture, but because it's trying to x-ray how a civilization that is perceived as alien is taking a swipe on an existing one in the form of colonialism, and by that creating a situation where people are trying to unlearn where they are coming from in order to be able to adapt this. But then the struggle they have is, while trying to learn the new civilization and how that affects their lives, there's a challenge, there's a difficulty in the unlearning process, you see, and that up till this moment is what is responsible for the various shades and appearances of self-actualization, self-determination, a society trying to see itself as not being an appendage of a larger society, but that it is independent on its own and can really, grow. So that's just what I have additionally to add to that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ksenia, I was just still stuck in your question to Darian about fiction being apolitical and political, and just think that researchers should start writing fiction, because sometimes people, fiction allows you to write everything that you don't want to write elsewhere or as a researcher. There's a lot of constraints researchers find, sometimes even with reviewers. They will say, take it out, with funders. So we might as well just start writing fiction. Yeah.
But what we're going to do with those technocratic reviewers too, who want to see everything evidence-based? Yeah, as long as we're not measured. But no, absolutely, I absolutely get your point. And I agree, perhaps that's the way to express what we cannot express, for those of us who can write.
I really want to connect with this because this has been one of the highlights of my year so far. Last semester, I co-taught with Erica Capel-James this class called Race, History in the Built Environment. And Erica is just really good at bringing in a lot of poetry and song. And we had one work of fiction on our syllabus. And then, as educators, just pushing students to feel free to not write a research paper for their final paper, actually write something either sort of autobiographical, or encourage folks to write fiction or speculative fiction specifically, and just it's so hard to even when you sort of set up a situation where people can be free to do that, it still takes or it took for us like a little bit more encouraging of people to be like this is not a game. Like you really can just like we will evaluate your work of fiction as important work, and you can put a lot of effort into it, and it could still be a robust final paper that is worthy of this classroom space. Like you should totally do that, because how many other sort of spaces are you able to do that in our sort of line of work? So yeah, I think there are a couple like spaces where people can kind of make tweaks to maybe make this a reality. Ksenia, and as educators, some of us do have a little bit of leeway there.
I love this, isn't it? Yeah, it's so cool. This is great.
Yeah, I find that I don't know. I think I would find that really challenging to think in a different way about my writing. I can see that there's a lot of power there to reach people that you will never reach through your nonfiction writing, probably. And maybe to like you were saying, Claudia, that's really, really true, is to like subvert some of the roadblocks to writing about certain things that we face. We were talking about this last week at the Hazards workshop as well. Some of the things that nobody says, there's like all of these elephants in the room that you just don't even talk about because it's like impolite, or because there's funders or partners there that you don't want to offend. So I need to think about this some more, but it's so true that that there's power in fiction. I don't know what's my problem, Ksenia. I don't understand with reading. I read so much nonfiction.
I'll analyze you on next live stream, because it's going to take us longer than 4 minutes, I'm afraid. Sorry, Jason.
True.
That'll be a fascinating episode. I'm sure everybody would look forward to that. But on that, I'm really mindful of time, and I'm already so grateful to Ksenia, Claudia, and Darian for gifting us your time, as always. Thank you so much. And Claudia, thank you so much for choosing this book. And you get a little siren, the traditional siren of every episode, I think. Yeah, thank you so much for choosing this book. You've really opened a great conversation, and if you people haven't read it yet, please go read it. Read the whole trilogy. Read more of what Achebe has wrote. Fantastic, thank you. Jason, do you have any final remarks? Oh yeah, of course we do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say about. I think Ksenia has dropped his connection, unfortunately. But I was going to ask if anybody has like any social media where people can connect with them for any further discussions. Shout out now, Ksenia and I are on Twitter and at Disasters Decon. How about you, Darian and Claudia?
Yeah, I am constantly wasting time on Twitter. My username is Nigro, Nigreaux.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter as well. Sometimes Claudia L. Santos.
Cool. And I think Ksenia is on Twitter as Ksenia KCO.
Oh, I don't know that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Connected with him recently.
Here we go.
But yeah, so next book group choice, Darian, it's over to you. What are we going to be reading?
Well, you will be pleased as someone who sticks to nonfiction.
Yes.
I'm so sorry, Ksenia.
That's fun.
I have selected Clyde Woods' Development, Drowned, and Reborn.
Amazing.
This was published posthumously by, kind of edited by Jordan T. Kemp and Laura Polito. I want to connect this book choice to what both Claudia and Ksenia shared earlier Like one, I think it's a really great text. I should say the subtext is like the blues and bourbon restorations in post-Katrina New Orleans, but like 90% of this book is written about the centuries of the Gulf Coast and of Louisiana and Mississippi before Katrina. So a very small sliver of this book is actually about disaster explicitly. And I think it pushes people to actually kind of sit with and engage histories, as Claudia said, a variety of like multiple rationalities. It pushes people to actually sort of see what knowledge that has potential to sort of decolonize land and spaces can really mean. And I think, Ken, what you sort of shared earlier about sort of this like creative and destructive sort of self-colonization swap. So Woods kind of talks about what planning sort of looked like with a variety of indigenous Mississippian societies. He goes into detail about all the different forms of knowledge and all the different ways people make claims about land and space and resources through music and art and religion. And I think, I don't know, from the current book reading, like we have the character Tony Clark, right, in this text, who like comes in and is kind of seen as like this progressive, maybe liberal, like practitioner of the colonial system, and who meets Winterbottom, who's just like, yeah, you're just like, you're young and idealistic, but like people back at the heart of empire, they don't know how things are really on the ground. And I'm a seasoned, I'm a seasoned practitioner. I know what's going on. And it's sort of like this false dichotomy when it's like, y'all are both colonizers. And I think Clyde Woods opens us up to actually seeing other options beyond the false dichotomies that we encounter in our work, and actually points to alternatives in a way that, again, like meaningfully wrestles with histories, doesn't sort of see people as categories or interest groups or stakeholders, but does a really good job of setting an example of sort of challenging even the frameworks that we use to think about our communities. So I love this book.
I'm excited to read it.
I'm so excited. Yeah, me too. I've ordered it yesterday. So yay! So we will tweet about the next book, and then we will choose a date as well. So please join us in reading our next book group book. And thank you again for joining us. Great to see you all, and thank you to our guests.
Thanks everyone.
For having us.
Thanks, y'all.